There are rumors out there that indicate that Antonio Reeves could be moving to another college team if he returns from the NBA draft, but I don't really think Kentucky is in any sort of danger of losing him.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what is going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on in to Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. You can make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing Antonio Reeves. We talked about this on yesterday's show, going to kind of dive into it at length today. Some rumors out there that he could be, if he decides to come back from the NBA draft, be looking at other schools to transfer to instead of playing for the Wildcats. I don't really think we should be taking any sort of stock in this rumor, and I'm going to explain why in just a little bit. We're also going to dive into some listener questions. So I asked you guys on yesterday's show to give me some listener questions, and you guys delivered, and I really appreciate it. Going to take a couple weeks to kind of dive into some of these, so we're going to try and answer, I believe, 4 on today's episode. So let's go ahead and get into it. Antonio Reeves, currently within the NBA draft process. Still yesterday, I think I told you guys this if you didn't catch it on Instagram or Twitter. Currently, Reeves is working out with the Bucks, if I'm not mistaken. So he's still working through his process. He's still going through everything. Had a really solid combine, or rather not the combine. I believe it was like the G League camp that was previous before the combine. I remember talking about it on the show and not necessarily remembering the difference between the G League camp and the actual combine itself. Obviously, you get one and then you potentially get an invite to another. So Reeves still going through the process, but according to, and again, we cited this on yesterday's episode, Kyle Tucker of The Athletic. I'm just going to read the tweet directly here. Now today, hearing lots of chatter from inside and outside the program that other schools are back-channeling their interest in Antonio Reeves, who still hasn't announced a return to Kentucky. Calipari needs to lock that one down pronto. And then a little bit later, Kyle Tucker tweeted or quote tweeted himself and said, "I still think he ultimately stays, but some folks are trying to poach him." So right now we're in a bit of a conundrum, right? Kentucky has 7 scholarship players on roster. You got to have more talent in the room if you want to be able to compete this season. I mean, it's just that simple, especially considering 5 of those guys are going to be freshmen. You need guys to come back, and they need somebody like Reeves to be able to step in and, whether it be in a starting role or in a backup role, provide a veteran presence for UK this upcoming season. One of you guys actually asked a question about the back channeling thing. I'm going to save that for the listener questions segment here in a little bit about kind of like, what does that mean? But as far as Kyle Tucker's reporting goes, again, it's similar to the Oscar Tshiebwe situation. It's not something that I believe is false. I don't believe there's anything wrong about what Kyle Tucker is saying, and he's obviously very confident in the fact that people are trying to poach him. He expressed that in his quote tweet. But I just simply don't believe that at the end of the day, if either Tshiebwe or Reeves decides to come back to college, they're going to be looking elsewhere. And I think that Reeves would really benefit from staying another year at Kentucky for a variety of reasons. And again, to be honest with you, it's kind of similar to what Tshiebwe is going through right now. If he were able to return to Kentucky, but it's a much larger scale with Oscar, obviously. But if Reeves were to return to Kentucky, I mean, you get your NIL. And I know that we've talked on the show recently about how Kentucky's really struggled with that, and they've really struggled with being consistent in offering players that want to come to Kentucky what they want to hear. I don't really know if that's something you're going to be able to, or if that's something you're going to have to fight through with Antonio Reeves, considering the fact that he's already been in the program for over a year, and he knows what he's getting out of this. And I really do think if Kentucky wanted to up any sort of amount of money they were giving him to make sure that he stays with the Wildcats, I think that they would do that. I think that NIL is fine. I don't think that he's going to be pulled away to go get paid somewhere else. a Power 6 school, a major Power 6 school, to kind of be their head guy. And that kind of leads me into what I was about to say here. It's not just about the money. If it's about the playing time, Kentucky can find ways to get him on the court consistently. He's one of, if not the most versatile piece on the team outside of Dawe. I think he's a little bit, obviously, more experienced and arguably at the current state of his career, more talented than Dawe, at least whenever you look at their raw numbers. When you watch them on the court, too, they both do different things, but I think at the end of the day, Reeves has more going for him just simply because he's more experienced. You could slot him in. I mean, if you wanted to rotate him around and you wanted to make sure he gets his playing time, I don't know if he would start. You and I have had conversations about that in the comments about what would that look like if he were to return with Justin Edwards, DJ Wagner, Rob Dillingham, all in that backcourt. And there are a lot of mouths to feed, but you could rotate him in at the 1 if you wanted to, if you had to. Obviously, his primary position, the 2 spot, you could have him be the backup 2. Reed Sheppard could rotate in somewhere else. Actually, to kind of go back to what I was saying about the listener questions, this may be something we tackle on tomorrow's episode. One of you had a lengthy response in your thought process through how the rotation could look, and I really thought it was interesting. I'll share it with you guys tomorrow. But you could have Reeves at the 2 primary backup, I guess, if you wanted to, or the starter, depending on how Kentucky wants to do that. Or, and some of you have disagreed with this in the past. I can't talk today. But I don't necessarily see any sort of problem with it. I think Kentucky could play him at the 3. If they really wanted to go small ball and they wanted to have some fun and do some run and gun stuff, they could definitely do that. John Welch, new addition to the staff. We talked about that on yesterday's episode if you want to go check that out, about how I don't think Kentucky's offense is going to significantly change from like a perspective of how they operate, but in terms of efficiency, in terms of the numbers that we see, I think you're going to see some things change for the better. I think that with Welch on staff, you could see some elite numbers, and maybe he does throw out some different rotations to run the same kind of sets that Kentucky has done in the past. Maybe he throws out a small ball lineup where you have Dillingham, Wagner, Reeves, you have Bradshaw at your power forward, and Onyenso at your 5 if you'd like to. I mean, that's a fun lineup. That's a lineup that can get up and down the court in a hurry. Kentucky could really, actually, if you wanted to, you could swap Bradshaw for Edwards if you wanted to really go small, and you could really have a lot of fun with the pace there. I'm sorry I'm interrupting myself. It's just there's so many different things that you can do with this Kentucky lineup if Reeves returns, and I think that that's a selling point for him, right? I think that's something you try and sell him on is, look, if you're unhappy with your playing time, it's not just one spot. Look, we're getting you ready for the next step in your career if you're going to go play overseas, which is not a bad thing, by the way. It's a very valuable thing to be able to go play overseas. A lot of money to be had there, although some people look down upon it for whatever reason. We're getting you ready for that next stage of your career where you can be a very versatile guy, where you can step into a situation in a place like Spain or a place like Israel or whatever have you, and you can really do some damage, understanding different positions and understanding how to operate an offense. And with your given assignments, I think that Reeves would certainly benefit from coming back to Kentucky and kind of learning the ropes at these different spots, especially in practice, especially with guys that are probably going to be playing in the NBA at some point in their career, probably most of them sooner rather than later. So there's a lot of reason that Kentucky would want to have Reeves back, why Reeves should come back. And it's just, I feel like at the end of the day, this is kind of my 2 cents on it. It's too comfortable of a situation for Reeves to really strongly consider leaving to go elsewhere, unless he just wants to be the star. If he wants to be the star of a team, I can understand it, because he's not going to be provided that opportunity, not with this recruiting class coming in. But I do think that Reeves has it good at UK right now. If his goal is to, get the last little bit out of his career and do it with a team that has a good shot of winning the title. And some of you may disagree with that. I think that if you bring in any sort of recruiting class like this, you've got a shot. I'm not saying they're going to. I'm not saying that they'll be in the title game. I'm just saying that the talent is there. So if you've got any thoughts on Antonio Reeves, if you've got any thoughts on what Kentucky needs to do with their rotation, with the transfer portal at that spot. We talked about shooting guard that Kentucky could go after if Antonio Reeves does not return to UK on yesterday's episode. Any thoughts? You can leave those in the YouTube comments below. All right, I want to dive into some listener questions here. I believe I've got 4 of them on tap from you guys. Really appreciate all of your questions. Before we get to that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, you guys need to make a fast break over to FanDuel because the NBA playoffs are wrapping up. We're about to head into the finals. You may be listening to this show, and Miami is already swept. Gosh, who are they? Why am I completely blanking on this right now? Whoever they're Boston. Man, I am really out of touch right now. After they sweep Boston, which I hope happens, by the way, you could see Miami and Denver in the finals here in just a week or so. I mean, we are really about to have what I think is going to be an incredible finals. The 8 seed versus the 1 out of the West. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Jokic, Butler, so many different things you can do over at FanDuel with those 2 players and every player on roster. If you want to dive into props, if you want to dive into odds, over-unders, you want to dive into spreads, FanDuel has it all, and they are absolutely phenomenal and super easy to use, by the way. New customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. There's literally no better place to bet the playoff action than at FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. So if you want to get in on the action, which I think you should, FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, wrapping up the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. If you have not subscribed to the show already, I would really appreciate it if you went ahead and did so. I mentioned this on yesterday's show, and I'll say it again. About 70, 71, 72% of the guys that listen, and gals out there, I know that you're out there, that listen to the show, that watch the show, are not subscribed. So hop on the bandwagon. There's no reason why you shouldn't be. It's daily Kentucky content. We talk about what you want to talk about here. I've made that very clear on yesterday's episode. If you've got a question and you want me to answer it, you can leave it in the YouTube comments below. I want to say this actually as we dive into this. One of you, I asked you guys, what do you want to hear about? Some of you did say you want to hear more about Kentucky football. A couple of you said you want to hear notes about baseball. I want to talk about that for a second. I will get to Kentucky baseball. I'm going to talk about that after the SEC tournament. After the SEC tournament wraps up here this week, I'm going to dive into what they're going to do in the postseason, where they fall in the regionals, and I will discuss that and I will preview that. So make sure you stay tuned for that if you're a baseball fan out there. The Wildcats have had a really good season. Started off hot, got cold a little bit down the stretch. We're kind of able to hold it together for the most part towards the end here. Really solid baseball team, one of the better ones they've had in a while. So Kentucky baseball is going to be worth talking about here once they make the postseason, which I believe they've already essentially done their due diligence there. So I will be talking about Kentucky baseball soon. So I appreciate all of the different comments and suggestions that people have thrown out there. Believe it or not, I would say that I think it was 3 or 4 of you asked questions about things that will be entire shows here in the future. So it may be a week, it may be a couple of days, it may be 3 weeks before I get to it, but just know I'm going to talk about it. I've got all your answers in a doc. And again, if you still have questions, don't stop now. If you want me to answer something else, I will gladly listen to you guys and kind of discuss what you want to talk about. So first question here comes from Josh Bowen, and I talked about this in the first segment of the show. What does it mean contacting him through back channels? And I put that in air quotes there. Why does this sound shady? Josh, a couple of things here. I'm going to be honest with you. I've not spoken to Tucker, Kyle Tucker, that is, who was reporting the stuff with Antonio Reeves and Oscar Tshiebwe, and utilized the term back channels for the reporting that he was doing, or the rumors that he was discussing on Twitter, whatever they may be. I don't know where his sources come from, but if he is defining them as back channels, I can only assume it's people that have relation to the program. I mean, Tucker said as much, saying that he's hearing things from people within the program. It's people within the program and people closely related to the program that don't necessarily have a hand in what's going on, but know enough to talk about it with other people that are spreading the news. So Every beat writer has sources, plural. Every person like myself and like people that do what Tucker does for a living, they've got people that they have relationships within the program and outside of the program that have influence, that will be able to tell you just about anything if they are truly tapped in as much as some of them truly are. Some really are, some aren't. It just depends on who you make relationships with and whatnot. But in Tucker's case with the back channels, I assume it's, and I'm literally just speculating here, I assume it's hearing it from a person who has a relationship with someone else who is currently dealing with that situation. So in this specific instance, with Antonio Reeves being contacted through back channels, Kyle Tucker or a beat writer could know somebody who knows somebody that is currently listening in on that situation. Or it could be Tucker knows a few different assistant coaches across the country. That's very possible. That could be saying, yeah, we're looking at getting a guy like Antonio Reeves. We're definitely, as a staff, analyzing his game, and we've been reaching out to him just to kind of talk about what a process would look like if he comes back to college basketball. So you say it sounds shady. It does on the surface when it's like, oh, we're talking through back channels. Look at all this stuff that nobody knows what's going on. There are so many different things that you and I will never know happen that go on within athletic departments, within basketball and football programs. We're just simply never going to know because, quite frankly, I don't think it's our business to. It's not our business to kind of see what is not under the light at times because, we're not working there. And as fans, I think that it's fun to dive into the rumors and whatnot of what's going on. And Josh, I'm not accusing you of anything. You're asking a really good question of why does it sound shady? It sounds shady to me because there's not enough out there. There's not enough definition as to what's going on here. And I would say that in some instances, it truly is shady. But in this particular instance, because of the fact that NIL exists, because of the fact that the transfer portal exists, and he's currently going through the process of the NBA, the whole NBA draft, I don't think that there's anything wrong with a college contacting him and saying, listen, if you want to consider coming back to college, I know right now you're kind of in an in-between period, but we would love to have you on our roster. Is that tampering? I don't think in this instance because he is already graduating. I don't know if he's graduated yet, but he's graduating and he's moving on, so to speak, at least at the moment. He's in an in-between period, so I don't think that there's anything illegal going on here. But I will say this. If there does come a point with a player that's not graduating or not going into the NBA draft that is being told by other colleges, hey, listen, we'll give you this much money if you come here, that is tampering. So that's a completely different conversation. But in this particular instance, Josh, it sounds shady, but I don't think that it is because of the new rules. And I'm not a huge fan of it. Obviously, I wouldn't want to see Reeves poached, so to speak, but that's just sometimes kind of how things fall. In the words of Aristotle, it is what it is. Great Kentuckian asks two questions, I believe, but I'm going to stick with the football question for today. I will be answering the basketball one soon. With Stoops picking up several important O-line transfers, do you believe Stoops is trying to build a secret dark horse with Leary leading the offense, or is this just a normal improvement in an area that really hurt Kentucky last season? You could split this either way, Great Kentuckian. I mean, you could sit here and talk about the fact that Kentucky last season was really held back by one of the worst offensive lines they've had in a hot minute. And you had a really good quarterback. You had a great receiving core. You had an offensive coordinator that was probably not what you wanted at the end of the day. You had some things holding you back, but the trench play was awful. I mean, there's no misconstruing it here. I mean, it was just bad straight up. So you get these players in, right? You get the guys from USC. I believe they got a player from Ohio State as well. I mean, those are two big-time programs, and those are two solid recruits that Kentucky picked up as well. They brought in several guys, like Kentuckian said, to shore up this O-line. Pair it with Devin Leary. Pair it with Ray Davis from Vanderbilt. You are rejuvenating an offense that was stale at times last season compared to what it was in 2021. I mean, honestly, I think Kentucky right now is starting things over with Liam Cohen with different pieces. They're getting the players that they want in that offense. And so I think Kentuckian, Yeah, you could absolutely make the case that Kentucky's building a secret dark horse right now, because here's the thing. There is room to be had in the SEC East right now. This is something that I believe guys like Josh Pate have been talking about a lot recently. I think J.D. Pickell of On3 has probably discussed this recently, about how people are discussing the SEC East being down, quote unquote. And that was kind of the situation for the early 2010s all the way through like 2015, 16, right before Georgia really started rise to power. I mean, the SEC East has consistently been the weaker division of the Southeastern Conference for quite some time. And there have been years here and there where, you know, Florida and Tennessee and South Carolina and even a team like Vanderbilt back in like, 2014, 2013? I mean, you've had years where just random teams rise up out of that division and it ends up being collectively a better product than what the opposite division puts out on a year-by-year basis. But right now, you see Georgia at the top, and then you look underneath them, and it's a mosh pit. You're looking at a guy or a team like Florida who's trying to figure things out in year 2 under Billy Napier. I'm curious to see how much time they give him there. You've got South Carolina, who has overachieved, so to speak, for 2 seasons in a row now. They've gotten to some better recruiting classes in. I think they're going to continue to recruit at a solid rate. They've got a really nice facility that they've just put in there. South Carolina is on the rise, and they, I think, in the public's eye, are probably comparable to Florida, but because of Florida's prestige, they're probably on the same level, despite not producing as much as the Gamecocks have over the past couple of years. You've got a team like Tennessee. You saw what they did last season with Josh Heupel in his second year really taking off with all of their players that were system fits, in my opinion, and you get some new players in, and the system is going to work again. So you've got another team there that's going to be very competitive. You've got a team like Kentucky, who has been competitive, has had a couple of 10-win seasons over the past few years. Sure, they had a down season last year, but you look at what they brought in to kind of rejuvenate the biggest part of their team, which I think is their offense, their offensive line specifically. No shade to the defense. Obviously, Kentucky's defense has been great for the past few years, but this offensive line is kind of what has made this boat sail over the past few years. And Kentucky's another team with a really good quarterback in Leary, with a couple of really good receivers in Dane Key and Barry and Brown. They can make some moves. They can truly make a push here. Missouri is a team that I'm really confused with. I like Eli Drinkwitz. I think he's a fun coach. I really do want to see him find more success with Mizzou. I don't hate Mizzou, but it doesn't really seem like they're able to get over the hump right now. And didn't they just extend him? I think it's a curious case at Missouri with their quarterback situation, with the fact that they've got all this talent out wide and they haven't really been able to utilize it that well. I don't know. I don't really know what to make of Missouri, but Missouri's not a bad team either. So you've got several teams in this mosh pit in the SEC East that could just find their way out. I mean, Tennessee with a new quarterback, it'll be interesting to see what Joe Milton does if he is the starter there. But Kentucky could absolutely make a push for second in the division. And I'll just say this, if we're trying to find wins this upcoming year, which one of you guys asked me, can you do a top 25 thing? Can you do an upcoming schedule preview? I will absolutely love to do that. We're going to do that in future episodes, though. I think that Kentucky, if we're talking about wins on the schedule and just wins at the end of the year, not even specifically talking about game by game, although in this instance, against the Alabama Crimson Tide, you play them in November, I know that team will have it figured out at that point, so it will be a battle. That's a game Kentucky can win. I mean, on paper, that is a game Kentucky can absolutely win, especially if it's in Kroger Field. They could end up losing by 40. I'm not predicting a win right now. I'm just telling you, the Crimson Tide are currently in a weird state. With all the talent that they have on roster and, not a quarterback to show for it, at least on paper right now, that could completely change after the month of September. They're in a weird spot, and playing a team like Kentucky on the road who has a veteran quarterback at the helm, a really solid coach, better trench play, that could be a recipe for disaster for Alabama, and it could be a recipe for success for the Wildcats. So final question here. Actually, no, we've got 2 more questions. Holy cow. Izix asks, and Izix, I think, asked 3 or 4 questions, but we're going to stick with the one here today. From Oscar, Reeves, or Livingston, who would you rather see come back at this moment? Straight up, I would rather see Oscar Tshiebwe come back for Kentucky. I think that right now Reeves would be great, but the fact that they have identified the player from Rutgers and Cam Spencer to potentially come over and kind of be that replacement as a sharpshooting guard who has some height to him like Reeves does. If you bring back Tshiebwe, if Tshiebwe announces in like the next 3 days, go and get Cam Spencer. You can really start to fill out this roster here if you would like to, with some of the players that you are looking at right now in the transfer portal. Speaking of, one of you guys asked about Isaiah Miranda. Probably going to talk about that on tomorrow's episode. As of right now, I haven't heard anything. I'm going to need to do some digging. But Oscar Tshiebwe, because of his talent, I would much rather have him come back. Do I think that it's best for him? No, and we've talked about that on the show before. Again, it's kind of a conflict of interests here because I think that Kentucky would love to have him back. I think Tshiebwe would like to come back, but I really do have concerns about what he could look like in next year's draft process because of this year's roster. We talked about this on previous episodes. I'm not going to dive into it today, but yes, I would rather have Oscar back, Reeves second, Livingston third, Reeves a close second, by the way. And final question here from Peyton Bullock. I may have missed it, but where did Daimion Collins end up? This is a very straightforward question. Not going to take a lot of time on this, but I appreciate the question, Peyton. I don't believe that he's transferred anywhere. If I'm not mistaken, he is currently still trying to decide where to go. At the end of the day, you're looking at a team in Texas. I don't know if it's going to be Texas. I don't know if it's going to be Baylor. It could be A&M for all we know, but you're looking at a team in that region for him to potentially go to because he's trying to move back closer to home. So we'll keep tabs on that. Lance Ware, speaking of, transferred to Villanova. I don't think I talked about that on yesterday's episode. No way, I think I did. But anyway, great spot for Lance Ware. He was looking at another Big East school in Providence. Great spot for him, and I really do hope that he's able to shine with the Wildcats. Still a Wildcat, as he tweeted out. Really, really love what Lance Ware was for this program. So again, if you've got any questions, if you've got any thoughts on what you want to hear from me out of Kentucky basketball or Kentucky football or baseball or whatever it may be, you can leave that in the YouTube comments below, or you can hit me on the socials at Locked On UK. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter again at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. One more time. Questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below or on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.